So Oklahoma City controls 6 in this scenario. And then the 2 at-large seats would then be divvied out amongst 10 as opposed to amongst 7 that were in the previous scenario. So those were the 3. Any questions on it? People totally bewildered?
The lottery that's held for the non-appointee communities over 5%, would their chances of winning that lottery be based on their population, relative population percentage, or is it just equal standing?
Well, that wasn't discussed, Blair, but I think the assumption was that it would be equal standing, because everyone would get an opportunity to get one sooner or later anyway. I mean, that's something that could be discussed. Yeah, almost like it's like the NBA lottery in that respect, that they're based on more balls in the thing. Any other comments, questions? This is all academic right now, guys. Of course, I mean, this a lot of work. Ultimately, it may not look anything like this. I mean, maybe there are scenarios. I know in the Orlando area, their new Sun Rail that they're developing, they have gubernatorial appointments as well in theirs, and I think maybe that could have been some kind of trade-off in getting some legislation through. I don't know, but I'm sure those considerations will be made as we get further down the road in this. Any other questions?
Well, a couple of comments and / questions. As I recall, to kick it off, it would be an at-large, all-district vote to establish it as a region.
That's correct.
So you would have polling information to determine whether or not some of these presumably outlying areas had any interest in being part of a system. There's no reason in forcing a neighborhood or a part of the city into it that has no interest in being in it. It's not helpful on the taxation side, or it's not necessarily fair, to force them into it. So you could see some tweaking of the lines in that regard. What if you then get into a situation where there are districts internally that just have no interest or don't want to be a part of it or don't want to be taxed? At that point, it's pretty much all in or nothing. That's right?
It is. Yeah, that's
okay. Now, in Dallas, I've recalled hearing that I believe it was residents in Irving had paid into the system for maybe 30 years before DART actually arrived. Is that
roughly? A
roughly?
little
Okay.
short of that. They approved it in '83, and service opened in 2009.
Okay.
Basically.
All right. Talk me through that, Doug. I mean, if that is presented to voters, very slim chance that people are going to vote for it, because they'll all be suspicious that theirs will be the area that does not get served for decades. Are we telling ourselves this is not just rail, this is bus rapid transit, this is everything in the fixed guideway study, and therefore we shouldn't be selling it as a rail concept, we ought to be selling it as a public transit concept?
That's correct.
And but nonetheless, there are going to be certain aspects that appeal to people and don't appeal to people. I'm just trying to think through all the political repercussions and the political psychology and trying to get people to buy in to what will be a relatively new concept for most of them. Because if you've grown up in Oklahoma City, all you really know is what you've seen. And with public transit, it's not much.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
I can add a point to that, and if you look at all of the more modern last 30-year RTAs and their systems, everybody talks about rail, but when you go look at the numbers, the bus portion of those systems is the single largest transit provider of ridership. And take Salt Lake City, for instance, it's 22 or 23 million is their bus ridership, where commuter rail might be 2 million and their light rail is 12 million. And so that does present the opportunity to sell it, because the bus portion is really it is the key component of that system.
Yeah, you're right. The whole concept of and we've talked about this internally. I know in that Finance Governance Committee we talked about it as well. that, you go to a vote, those people that, at the end of the line that are not gonna get the service for quite some time, what incentive is there that we can provide, to make them, to reassure them that they're gonna get something? And, it's problematic, certainly, but I think you can provide maybe some funding to improve infrastructure, in lieu of that service in some future date, prepare themselves for that expansion. There's some things you can do.
Well, Doug, you have to separate Dallas a little bit, because DART's a light rail system. And that's a whole different animal than talking about commuter tracks that already exist. The opportunity to get all three of the corridors we're looking at up and running within a reasonable time frame is a whole lot better than Dallas ever had to do with DART. Because they had to buy new right-of-way, build the new rails. It was extremely expensive and extremely time-consuming. So we don't want to get too much, I'm not saying it wouldn't take some years, but it could be up and running if the money was available a lot quicker.
Oh, yeah, there's no doubt about that. Like Marion said, enhanced bus is a huge component to the fixed highway study. All parts of the region would experience that.
I would just add, there's still cities in the DART system that haven't gotten rail anyway. Addison and Glen Heights are still there. They both have terrific bus systems. And, I don't know that that's completely what they want, obviously. But, certainly as you pick up this discussion about governance, the whole financing side of this has got to be rolled into that. Because, if you're talking about establishing a district like this and then implementing a tax within that district, if it's a new district, it almost certainly needs new legislation. So, we may want to pull back a little bit on some of that based on what your legislative abilities are with taxing, or, with creating some revenue stream within that district.
And Doug, answer if you can, or if anybody else can answer. How would you anticipate the transfer of assets to take place? In other words, if Oklahoma City has a transit hub, and if we're going to be somehow transferred in an intergovernmental relationship to this new entity, how would that take place? And would dollars exchange hands?
Yeah, I would say the answer to that is it could. There's lots of different arrangements that can be made. Certainly if that facility was purchased with federal funds, you'd have to bring FTA into the mix just to make sure that they're okay with it. But there have been instances where, like the DART system started, there was the Dallas Transit system, they just handed over the equipment. I don't think there was an exchange of dollars at all.
There could be a leasing agreement or something like that too, Mayor. If we're talking about Santa Fe Station or something like that.
Is there a municipal attorney in the room? Hard to imagine. Okay, I was just wondering how Oklahoma state law might reflect on that type of transfer.
That's certainly one of the questions we have to ask.
And the whole finance, we'll talk about this probably next meeting, but I would certainly submit that our discussion and our research on financing would be part of this committee that you want to establish, so that we can roll that into the discussion. However, it may complicate the discussion, and we can look into stuff like that for you.
That'd be great.
All right, and I know there's some enabling legislation already in place. Can someone give a kind of a brief overview of what's there now?
Yeah, Bob Kemper's in the back of the room. He's probably best prepared to answer that.
Yes, there is. A couple of years ago, there was a law passed in the legislature that creates an entity known as regional transportation authorities. And the way these authorities come into being is that in combination of coterminous Oklahoma counties, towns, and cities, by a resolution of their governing body, can create a regional transportation authority. Once the authority is established, it's essentially an empty house with a lot of empty rooms, and it can be, the governance can be set up however the authority wants it to be. It's also set up where it can run concurrently with a regional economic development authority as well. But as far as setting it up, it just takes a matter of a resolution passed by the governing entities, and that creates the authority.
Currently, would they have the power of eminent domain?
It has all the power of virtually any state agency. or commissioned except for the power of eminent domain. That's the one exclusion that it does have.
Could it be done by precinct though? You said.
It can be done, the way the law reads is by coterminous city, counties, and towns. I would think that it could probably be done by precinct as well, as long as they're,
Within those.
yeah.
I think we need some work, yeah.
It provides the ability to doesn't it allow for the RTA? Is it talking
Yeah,
about
the
taxation?
RTA has taxing authority, the ability to issue bonds, to work with federal government, state governments, and any funding mechanism that any other state agency or commission would have. It would have that authority. Again, the only exclusion is on eminent domain, but that's the only way we get the law through. And we got to take that part out.
Do you know if it'll I mean, does it require that the revenue be generated at the same level in each part of its member districts or member communities?
Probably the way it's set up, that can be determined by the governing board once it's established.
Because that's been a huge issue in Dallas, and the whole concept of having a junior member per se is off the books because of the state legislature.
Well, that would be like, say, up to the governing authority once the authorities institute.
Okay. Thanks, Bob.
Is there an initial speculation in terms of, would the revenue be collected on a geographical basis, or ridership basis, is that part of the thought behind this? Or?
Well, I think it would depend on the source of taxation first. If the assumption is sales tax, then, we can know
Gotcha.
the answer to that. But, if we're looking at ad valorem or other means.
So for now, this stands alone?
Yes, that's correct.
One thought that occurs to me is that this is obviously a long time coming and a long time being implemented as it is. The makeup of the board, if it is 9 or 11 members, the question came up earlier about terms of membership, and it was understandable that your reaction might be, we haven't got the terms or meeting dates yet. So. But one of the things that would be good to think about as that begins to take form is, because of the complexity of this and the length of time it will take to develop and implement, having minimal turnover in the board each year will be very valuable, and having some longevity with its members will be valuable, so that, well, for obvious reasons, is the complexity of it, having some continuity in the planning and implementation, and too much turnover in a relatively short period of time could really make the both development and implementation, you could jeopardize it.
Yeah, very
Significant turnover.
well put, very good. Makes a lot of sense.
One last thing on this, I think the city of Austin is sort of a couple of steps ahead of this region in this regard, and they've chosen more of a hold off on the governance approach until they figure out what the funding is going on. And we looked at, there's Capital Metro, which is just 3 cities within the region, and then there's, I don't know, on the order of 10 to 12 other cities that they're interested in at least having some sort of arrangement with. And so they've chosen a local government corporation or joint powers types of authority, which Capital Metro would be part of and would also staff. And then these cities would contract with this entity, and they've looked at funding sources like sales tax increment, some of the things that don't require a referendum right off the bat to start generating funding within those cities. And when it's not really the same level of tax in each one of those jurisdictions, but it's kind of been put forth as sort of the same level of pain for a small city versus a small town versus a large city. And I think, our numbers are in the neighborhood of 28 to 30% of sales tax growth in those areas. So, that's kind of the tack they've taken. And then as they grow and as they need more funding, or they need to establish a more solid funding source, then they might incorporate it into an RTA. So the governance is kind of a few years behind.
Well, that's probably a good point, good segue into the second part of my item here today is, I would like to form a smaller group, working group, subcommittee, committee, whatever you want to call it, to help us address, start to begin to explore some of these questions that we have here today. And we'd like it to be from this steering committee if possible. I know everybody's busy, but if there are those that believe they have the time and the energy to do this, we'd be happy to have you as part of this group. We, ACOG staff, will staff it and do as much research as possible for you all. But we would like to get some guidance and leadership from this group in this arena. And ultimately, I think our objective is to get to a point where we feel very comfortable about a formation of an RTA. And hopefully this group would be able to help us accomplish that. So,
Can I suggest we contact you if we're interested, and then you
That
can
would be
kind of
great.
sort through them and
yeah.
we can see the level of interest. But I think we need, elected officials from each of the municipalities. I think that's kind of minimal for this aspect of it. And,
Yes, sir. No, that'd be
others
fantastic.
are welcome, but, okay.
Yeah, that sounds great.
As part of this process ongoing, made reference to Denver a number of times and progress of Denver with this. I'd offer in early August, the former mayor of Denver that would have put a lot of the early parts of this together, Federal Canyon, will be here in Oklahoma City. And if you'd like, I'd be happy to give you those dates and see if there's some way to coordinate some engagement. I'm sure he'd be interested in meeting with this group or a subset of this group and talking about their processes and so on. So if that would be of any
Yeah,
interest,
that'd be fantastic.
let me know.
Love
I
to
think
have
that's
some.
Yeah, that would be really, maybe perhaps the subcommittee,
Yeah,
just,
that'd be great.
right?
There's no other questions, I'll turn it back to you, Mayor.
Well, we're on to item 4 on the agenda, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Well, on behalf of the Corridors Study Project team, I just want to offer our heart and prayers for what's been going on in the city. It's pretty amazing we've gotten this kind of turnout. I would have this whole spiel about, if anyone here that wasn't able to make the meeting, that we're happy to make the extra effort to bring them up to speed at their convenience, and certainly we offer the flexibility, whatever we need in terms of keeping this project going and knowing that you all have a lot of other issues to deal with. So with that, we're here to give you a little bit of an update on our project. Ian Bryant was the one who was supposed to give this presentation. He is the proud father of a baby boy on, Friday night a week. They spent a few of his hours, baby's first hours in the tornado shelter. So welcome to the world, young Mr. Bryant. But we're going to introduce our project name and logo and unveil it today. We're going to talk a little bit about the project goals and sample objectives. We really hope that we can go to some meetings that are coming up with stakeholders and our advisory committee meetings that we're going to be putting together. Christy's going to talk a little bit about the logistics associated with those. We're going to try to get a bunch of input from them and then come back to you with a series of goals and objectives based on your votes from before and their input. As I said, Christy's going to talk a little bit about our outreach efforts, and then Andrea's going to come up and talk a little bit about the parallel transportation facility analysis, which is, if you think of an AA, we've got goals and objectives on one side from which we will establish evaluation criteria and give ourselves a way to try to evaluate alternatives. On the other side of that equation is parallel transportation facility analysis, and we'll be doing a technology review so that we can establish some alternatives and define some alternatives in each of those corridors, which we will evaluate using our evaluation criteria that we develop.